Conversations with. And Conversations with is basically a one-on-one conversation with people who are working in the digital space that we hope the Caribbean is going to become after the pandemic. So today, our guest is Onika Morris-Alleyne, and she is a principal consultant at Mobility by Design. That is a boutique consulting firm that is focused on finding better ways to get around and making public space useful and enjoyable. She guides clients in creating simple, implementable, maintainable, and sustainable solutions to built environment and transportation problems. Onika is an engineering, planning, and policy professional with 15 years experience working at the nexus of urban form, urban design, and transportation. Her practice is focused on mobility, accessibility, sustainability, and equity in the urban context. She's had roles in public transportation, planning and management, infrastructure development, project management, strategic analysis and planning, operations, research and management, urban transportation policy development, and travel planning. She holds a BS in civil engineering from Howard University and an MS in sustainable transport and travel planning from that's Loughborough. You know how the the British, because I could have been Americanized and say Loughborough. It's Loughborough University. She is currently pursuing a PhD at the University of the West Indies with a research focus on street design and urban development outcomes in small island developing states. So welcome, Onika.
Hello, good evening, everybody.
So you said we were going to talk about mobility as a service, MaaS. And of course, people think, oh, this is a super buzzword, but we don't know what it means.
Yes.
So could you give us that meaning in a really quick couple of paragraphs? Then?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, the underpinning behind it is an old idea, an idea that's as old as passenger transportation itself, which is the idea of sharing transportation vehicles. That's basically the idea beneath it. What it means in the modern context is that it refers to technological platforms that can be utilized to plan plan journeys from origin to destination, pay for journeys, basically to organize one's transportation via shared means as opposed to means that you own. So mobility as a service rather than mobility as something that you own by, say, owning a car. So that's really the basis of what it is.
Okay, so basically we're talking public transportation.
Among other things, yes.
And the idea would be that if I wanted to go from here to Toko, this would help me figure out, okay, I'm in Belmont. I need to get a taxi to XYZ location, and then I need to get, or I go to City, I get a taxi, I go to Citygate. But then from Belmont to Citygate, I need to take two taxis. So it will tell me I need taxi 1, and then I need taxi 2, and then I'll get to Citygate, and then I take this bus, and that bus drops me off, and then I take a taxi to go to Toko Lighthouse, for example.
That is the general idea, yes. And it comes about in a number of different ways, a lot of different things. So most of the MaaS platforms that we're looking at now look at public transportation information, but there are a whole heap of things that you can utilize it for what they refer to as the transportation network companies, for example, Ubers and the Lyfts, and even things like Bixi Bike in Montreal, and basically any form of transportation that is shared in some way can be utilized through a mobility as a service platform.
So would it also start to include things like timing?
Well, it's a necessary thing. One of the important things about what mobility as a service provides to the passengers information, and that information includes where to go, when things are happening, how much things cost, basically everything you need as a user to sort of navigate the transportation space and shared transportation can be part of a mobility as a service platform.
So it'd be really cool if I were home in Belmont and I said I wanted to go to Turco and I wanted to get there at 11 o'clock. It would tell me what time to leave, what time the taxi pass in, what time the bus leave in, how long it will take, how long do I have to wait to change buses, do I have to walk from one bus station, from one bus stop to another bus stop, or from one taxi stand to another taxi stand and all that.
Yes, that's the general idea, yeah.
And then you had mentioned pay. So would it be super cool if I just paid on my phone and then everybody would just somehow get their money?
Well, that's some of the most sophisticated mobility as a service apps do allow you to pay through the app. So for example, one mobility as a service app, which is not a comprehensive app, but it's specific to a specific service, is Uber. And you can pay for Uber through the Uber app. So the more complex service apps that, for example, put you together with multiple different types of transportation, multiple different transportation providers, et cetera, you can either, some of them in, for example, some Asian countries, you can pay for everything through the app. Or there are apps, for example, like City Mapper, which just give you the journey planning information, and then you pay through the whatever the relevant means are. So there's all kinds of ways to do mobility as a service platforms, all kinds of ways to do mobility as a service apps. The only thing that really applies is that the information has to be in the application. It has to be there. And in terms of when things are happening, where things are happening, where you have to go. And the other part of the mobility as a service platform that must be there must be some kind of shared transportation. So, I mean, some people say that, okay, well, if it tells you that you have to drive from here to there, that's still part of the thing. But the way that we look at it inside the transportation spaces is really about shared mobility, not so much about, mobility that you own yourself, like the car.
So you think, is that something that we're anywhere close to in the Caribbean, or?
There are some very interesting mobility as a service apps around. I mean, the TT Rideshare app, like I said, it's a simpler app. It doesn't have multiple different modes of transportation within the app, but that's a simple mobility as a service app. Another app, I think I saw one recently that started putting in taxi information in Trinidad. So basically can tell you, because one of the things about navigating Trinidad in a taxi is I have no idea, and I have lived here basically my entire life. I have no idea most of the time where I get a taxi to go somewhere. If I am in town and I decide that I want to go to a certain part of Petty Valley, I do not know where to find the taxi stand that is going to take me there. I'll have to ask somebody. I'll have to look around. When I get to the place that I think is the taxi stand, I'm going to have to ask a taxi driver, well, does this go to this place, and so on and so forth. All that information has to be captured and placed in the central repository for mobility as a service platform to work.
So it would be also way cool to map the actual routes, because then, sometimes as a woman in a taxi, you get in the taxi and the man start to drive place you're not accustomed, and then you get a little concerned because it's kind of like, where are you taking me?
Yes.
But if we had standardized routes, which we kind of do, then you would know immediately what's going on from your app. Is that?
Yes, that's the general gist of it. But even in a situation where you don't have standardized routes, like again going back to the Uber example, in a situation where you don't have a standardized route, there's still a mapping function. So even if you are not sure where you are, the map will tell you. Even if it's not a route, the map will tell you, and that's one of the safety aspects of those types of apps as well.
Cool.
Yes. And that's something that we have to be very concerned about in this space in particular.
Okay. Kevon, do you have a question from the audience in the chat? Anyone?
Hi, good evening, Jackie. Good evening, Onika. So this is not so much a question from the audience at large as it is a personal question. I'm fascinated by this topic. And my question is, how would we mitigate against the effects of introducing mobility as a service among the traditional non-data savvy taxi service providers? I mean, sometimes when it comes to novel ideas, it always seems a bit contentious, but it doesn't have to be that way. How do you see that working out?
I don't see it as contentious or problematic because on the other side of these types of apps and platforms, you don't necessarily need to be technically savvy for them to work for you. So take, for example, one of the more standard, I guess, mobility as a service apps that is used in a lot of places all over the world is an app called City Mapper. And City Mapper is a journey planning app. It doesn't allow you to pay through the app, but it's a journey planning app. And it basically tells you where you can find X, Y, and Z, what takes you where. And it tells you this without the person on the other end of the app, the transportation service provider, actually having to do anything. So once the information is actually there, when it comes to, for example, a taxi driver driving a route taxi, for example, then once the information is already inputted, it doesn't have to come from the taxi driver. It has to come from wherever you can find the information. Somebody could just go out and ask the taxi driver, hey, what's your route? And they can plug it into this app. And then that taxi driver is now part of the ecosystem without ever having to actually interact with the platform. So that's one way that these things get done. In the case of platforms such as Uber, there's a minimal interaction with the platform on the part of the service provider because they have their app on their side that helps them to pick up rides and so on and so forth. But that, again, is not a complicated UX. So I don't feel like it's a problem in the sense of even if there's a low take-up of the technology, that it would create an issue for adoption, if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. Kevon, did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So one of the things that I've been wondering about with regard to transportation, mobility, and journey planning in general is the interaction between the transportation and the space in which we take that transportation. Because one of the things that I tried to use TT Rideshare. Okay, I really shouldn't say the name, but I tried to use a local app. And because of where I live, I was told that they could pick me up at the police station or the fire station. It is further for me to walk to the police station. Let's not even talk about suitcases because that was pre-pandemic, but anyways. So I would have to find myself to the police station. I have a car, I can drive. I mean, a lot of Trinidadians do have that's part of one of our problems with all these things because we don't use public transportation as much. But yeah, lots of people have cars. So I could have driven my car to the police station, but then there's no parking there. And there's no parking on the street by the police station either. And they wouldn't pick me up inside because some people have a bad, Belmont has a bad rep. And I'm trying to think, how can somebody tell a female person to walk to the police station because you don't want to take a route taxi at night because most of the legitimate route taxis have gone home, but you do want to get some sort of transport out. So I would either have to jump into the route taxi, which may be an illegal taxi. And by the time I'm in the car, I might as well have them take me where I want to go. Why do I need, So I'm trying to think of the mindset that says, why would we have those limitations on our transportation system? Why do we have these gaps? Why do we have these spaces where people have to, where we can't have a seamless experience?
Now you're taking me into questions of policy.
Well, that's your space.
You're taking me into questions of policy. We don't value it. It's that simple. Policy is about how we value things, what we value, and what we put our what's the term I would use? Our capital, our economic capital, our political capital. What we put our capital. The idea is that we put our capital into making happen. Somebody seems to have decided a long time ago that Trinidadians like to drive. No, this is not what I have found to be the case in my own research. Trinidadians drive because they have to in a lot of instances. But somebody decided a long time ago that Trinidadians like to drive, and so it is not worth any capital, political or otherwise, to invest in public transport and public space in the sense that we would need to in order to make things, platforms like this, make sense for us in that kind of way. So, I mean, I could go on and on about policy. I know we're not necessarily here to talk about transportation policy, but it's really one of the things that does need to happen. We need to change our mindset around transportation and public space and how we utilize it and what makes it important. And that is when we talk about all these nice, I will call them, these lovely technological platforms, and we go abroad and we see all these wonderful things and we want to have them here. You say, great, wonderful. Here are all the things that we would need to change in order for this to work for us. And then all of a sudden it's a different story. No, we can't do that, whatever. So that is what tends to happen. Now, there have been small pockets of places, small things where people have gotten together and done things for themselves. And that has worked to some extent. So, for example...
Oh, I was just going to say, do you have any examples?
Yeah. We've got, like I said, like the TT ride shares and like these taxi associations that come together and the maxi associations that come together. You'd be surprised at how much work in transportation policy and in actually discussing what matters in transportation for Trinidad and Tobago is done in these taxi and maxi associations. People always deride maxi taxi and taxi associations, but I'm here to tell you all they're doing some of the most innovative work in the transportation space in this country. So they get together, they put their heads together, and they do things together, and policy tends to follow them rather than guiding them. So that's where we are in this space.
So you had mentioned that there are many things that we would need to do. What are these things? I mean, we obviously cannot continue with the 3 cars per household kind of vibe. It's not sustainable.
There's nothing new under the sun. Nothing that we have to do has not been done elsewhere. Nothing that we have to do has not been done here. That's one thing that's important to realize, that our current transportation paradigm has only been with us for roughly, 40 years, 50 years? Mm-hmm. Prior to that, we had an entirely different transportation paradigm, one in which people walked, one in which people used public transportation, one in which people cycled, one in which public space was more of a welcoming and safe place to be. This new paradigm is really something that sort of came up in the 90s, 30 years, really, when this whole thing exploded, this whole car thing exploded in Trinidad. So so the first thing is to recognize that this is not new. That's the first thing. It's not a straight reversion either, because that's the other thing that happens. People get nostalgic. They want things to be how they are or how they were. And that's true. Yes, I get a lot of comments like we should have brought back the train and this, that, and the other. So it's not about nostalgic reversion to type. And it's also not about looking at it as some kind of pie in the sky thing that is a futuristic thing. It is about looking at the here and now. What does the country need in terms of the transportation paradigm? The country needs to be able to move people, goods, and information efficiently, effectively, quickly. That's what it means. How is it best served to do that? Well, look around. What do we have? We have 2 lovely long corridors along which people live and a very sparsely populated rest of the country. That makes things super easy for public transportation. And once something is made very easy for public transportation, it's made very easy for transportation in general. So a lot of the things that people complain about, the traffic and the exhaust and all of these kinds of things, these are things that we can almost wave our hands and get rid of, but it requires a decision to be made. And the decision is the hard part. That's really where we are. There's nothing complex about what we need to do.
We just need
to do it.
The decision and the intent behind the decision.
Yes, because a lot of people, when people know what I do, they come and talk to me a lot about their transportation choices, both at home and abroad, because the transportation choices abroad say a lot about people's transportation choices when they travel, say a lot about what they actually want, surprisingly. So I talk to people about their transportation choices here and abroad. I talk to them about why they don't do the things abroad that they would do here, why they do things here that they would not do abroad. People talk to me a lot about different methods of public transportation and all those kinds of things and what they like and what they don't like. And I get a lot of anecdata, let's call it, just from people coming up and talking to me about their transportation choices, which is good because it is so hard to actually capture people's transportation preferences in other ways. So people coming up and talking and saying these things is always great because it helps you to figure out what they actually want. There's a Henry Ford quote that I love to utilize because I think it sort of lays it out, which is that if you ever ask people if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Mm-hmm. And that's basically it. Only in talking to people do you get a sense of what they actually need, and you can give them what they need beyond what they're saying, if you understand what I mean by that. Yeah, so that's the faster horses paradigm.
Yeah, because it's something that says if you know what you are missing, but you've never seen the solution. Mm-hmm. And most people are not the innovators who can see something that they've never seen before. They can't conceive of something they've never seen before. So that makes life difficult for them to do. But
that's part of it. And the other part of it is that, strangely enough, transportation is very counterintuitive. Public transportation, I would say, is very counterintuitive in a lot of ways. And a lot of the things that you think are common sense about transportation are actually incorrect. So, for example, I have a lot of people, I have never been a highway engineer, but I've worked on highway projects, and I have a lot of people come up and talk to me, we need to widen the highway thing, we don't have enough room for cars and thing. And when we start to talk about things like bus lanes and all that, well, no, to do that, you have to widen the highway, because you can't take away a lane from cars. So
yeah, you can.
But
then I've worked on highways. I was an engineer.
No, but that's
so
actually.
Yes, I do know about that.
But the truth of it is actually counterintuitive. The truth of it is that there's a phenomenon called induced demand, which basically states that if you give things more space, they will expand to fill the space. People look at transportation in the same way that they look at liquids.
Mm-hmm.
I try to explain to them, no, transportation is actually a gas. And I don't know if that's too much of a nerdy inside joke, but basically people think of transportation as something that flows. So if you want it to flow more, you open up the pipe. But that's not the way it works. It actually expands to fill the space that you put it in. So the more space that you give it, the more it takes over. So what you need to do is you need to look at it and see what space does it actually need? How are the best ways to move as many people, because it's people that we have to move. It's people, it's goods, it's information. Let's be very clear about that, because we talk a lot about moving cars. We're not trying to move cars, we're trying to move people. You can move a lot of people in a small amount of space.
Yes, trains, buses.
Yes.
I've seen the chart.
Yes.
You know, the one where they show all the people in the cars and you got all the space and they're really spread out. And then they put them on bicycles and so on and it gets small. And then they put them in a bus or a train and the whole traffic jam just disappears.
Yeah, that's a standard graphic in my business now. It's an old graphic, but a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, I saw a couple of questions coming, but I didn't really see them.
Oh, okay. This question from Niran. If you had full support, what method or methods would you choose to implement in Trinidad and Tobago and why? That sounds like an exam question. Eh?
How much time do you have?
You got 32 more minutes on the schedule.
Okay. Complete pie in the sky, no limitations kind of talking here. I would start with space and activity. And the reason I start with space and activity is because transportation is not something that exists for its own sake. Aside from the odd Sunday drive, most people in motion are trying to get somewhere. They're trying to go from one place to another, or they're trying to get goods from one place to another, or they're trying to get information from one place to another. That's what transportation is. So the need to move things physically from one place to another is the need that we're trying to solve. So the less you have to move things from one physical place to another, the more you reduce the need for transportation in the first place. And then you can start talking about, okay, given this, what is the most effective way to move this group of people from this place where they are to this place where they need to be? So when I start talking about transportation, I always start talking about public space first. I always start talking about decentralization first. I always start talking about these things first, because these things drive transportation. And then I come and I talk about transportation after. So people are always just kind of like, but I thought you had to talk about transportation. I'm like, well, I am, but this is how I'm talking about it. So the first thing I would do, decentralized government. And
quick question, haven't we effectively done that in the pandemic?
Yes, we have managed to do a great deal of that in the pandemic. And we have done a great deal of that through the use of technology. And the fact that we were able to do it so quickly tells me that we should have done it a long time ago. So part of it is through the use of technology, but also in realizing that a lot of things that we're doing, we don't really need to be doing at all. Which is great. Oh, well,
I mean, there's some things that I know we can reduce the physical transfer of things, especially in the finance field, you know.
Finance and government. Finance, government, and education are the three biggest drivers of movement.
It's true, because when these hundreds of thousands of students go back to school, it's just over a couple of hundred. They don't go to school where they can walk to school.
No, they don't.
The location of school is often very, very far from where they sleep and wake up and have breakfast and then have to go to school. So basically, we're now starting to talk about what?
We're talking about education policy. We're talking about
basically changing the concept of regionalizing your education, because it matches
regionalizing everything. One of the things that I've quite enjoyed about the pandemic is that I can do things at licensing online.
Yep.
And I just apply that to everything else. There are so many things that you're required to do in government that require you to go to some centralized location. There's so many things that are required to do in finance that require you to go to some centralized location. There's so many things that are required to do in education that are required to go to some centralized location. And part of that is because, particularly in education, they talk about agglomeration effects and all those things. But part of that is really because we have not looked at the way that we live in quite some time, not with a critical eye, and determined if the way that we live is actually of use to us. And again, we seem to be veering off the topic of transportation, but we are not, because this all leads back to the fact that as long as we live this way, this is the way we also have to move.
Right. Because when you talk about decentralizing, we're basically talking about bringing work closer to home.
Yes, that's one of the things.
That's one of the things we can do. Bring work, service,
education, everything. Bring everything closer to home.
And one of the ways that we've done that in the pandemic is by bringing it directly into your home through online services. And we know that education in a pandemic has, that's my field, has unfortunately confused a lot of people with the online education, because online education is not what we've been doing. But the idea of flex and hybrid classes and so on, even with the hybrid workspace, that sort of thing can basically reduce the amount the transportation needs, not so?
Two concepts that we look at when we look at that in transportation. One is trip reduction and one is trip shortening. So one is to reduce the number of trips that we need to take altogether, and the other is to shorten any trips left to such a short length that they can be accomplished by means other than the car.
We're talking walking a bicycle.
We're talking walking, cycling, public transportation to some extent. That's the goal. That's the ideal in transportation. Remove all unnecessary trips, shorten the ones that are left to the point where they can be done in half an hour by any mode, and none as far as possible, or as few as possible, I should say, by the private automobile. That's the ideal.
So basically, if what you are talking about is actually implemented, there's going to be nobody waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get to school for 8 o'clock anymore.
Nobody should have to do that. Why have we accepted that as a way to live?
It's a terrible way, because I don't see, if you've taken 5 hours, basically the entire almost half the workday just to get to work or to school, how you could possibly do anything when you get there.
And you can't, and that's one of the reasons that things are the way they are.
So basically, the transportation also can support our productivity and our economic, what we do, age, forgetting the words.
Yes, because I'm glad that you use the word support, because that's what transportation is. It's support. It's a circulatory system. It moves what needs to be moved, but it is not a thing in and of itself. It's not a be-all and end-all. It supports life. So the first thing we have to do is decide how we want to live life. And once we've decided how we want to live life, then transportation just slots in there. The right method show themselves, the right mode show themselves, the ways that we want to move around show themselves once we decide what we want our lives to be. And that is where we have accepted a model of life that is incongruent and incompatible with anything but the automobile.
Kevon, have you seen any questions? Does anyone have any questions? You can just raise your hand or put it in the chat.
So far,
this seems to have gotten a little more philosophical than I intended at the beginning.
So Jackie and Onika, there haven't been any more questions so far. I just wanted to interject something. It's the issue of transportation becoming a core consideration for public housing. And I want to know if, Onika, if you've seen or heard of that at all in any spheres, whether it's become reality with the new wave of public housing. Just your thoughts on that.
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I will say that probably one of the worst things that we did in this country was the bedroom communities, because if you separate all the things that people need to do, so if people live here and work here and go to school over there, then you've created a problem that you now have to solve. So public housing really does need to take into consideration not so much transportation, although maybe in this paradigm, yes, transportation, but needs to take into consideration all the services that support life. If I am building a public housing community now, something like a Diamond Vale or a Trinity, to me, that has to be a space of mixed use. That has to have schools, that has to have supermarkets, that has to have a town hall where people can go and do their services. It has to have a community center. It has to have a library. It has to have all the things that it has to have cafes and restaurants and all the things that it has to be a community. Because if you are building a community that has no community other than housing, then you're building a community where people have to leave to get anything that they want, and you're building in a transportation problem that you then have to solve. And the way that we have solved that transportation problem has been with cars. Occasionally, we try to solve it with transit, but most of the places that we build these things are not along transit lines, and we end up with some kind of rough approximation of public transportation through PH taxis and all these other things. We create the problems for ourselves by starting from the wrong place.
Great, thanks. Onika, I have a follow-up question to that. With the pandemic, we have had a mix of institutions that have widened their teleworking practices and those that had to implement teleworking in a rush. And it is said that these sort of practices would have a lasting impact on how we work even beyond the pandemic. Do you see that affecting the transportation needs within this country, and how so, if yes, or if not, could you give some details on that? I'll preface that by saying that we don't have at hand a clear map on the whole teleworking scheme in the country. We know that people are told to stay at home and work, and there are mixed experiences across the board. We had Kirk Henry on this series a while back who said he rolled it out for the government sector. So it's a tricky question, but my long-term thinking is, well, how are the transportation needs evolving in this country?
I will say that it depends on whether we see the pandemic as a blip or an opportunity. And I think that a lot of people who have to make these decisions are seeing the pandemic as a blip, as something that's going to happen and be over. And then we are going to return to the way that we did things before. There are a lot of people who are quite determined that is what is going to happen. They don't like these new paradigms. They want things to go back to the way they were. So if we do that, then we're going to have the same problem that we've been having, and we're going to have to try to solve it in the way that we've been trying to solve it for the last 30 years. If we see the pandemic as an opportunity, then it's a whole different conversation that we're having. If we see it as an opportunity to change the way that we educate, if we see it as an opportunity to change the way that we work for the better, if we see it that way, then we're having a completely different conversation about transportation. Then we can start having that trip reduction and trip shortening conversation and looking at then public space within what we call, so there's a concept called transit-oriented development. Which is basically a transit-oriented development is a roughly, I like to use time rather than distance, roughly a half hour circle from a transit hub. And within that half hour circle, now that half hour circle can be defined as a pedestrian circle, as a public transportation circle, as a cycling circle. Half an hour on any of those modes gives you quite a different distance, which is why I don't like to use distance. But that concept of the transit-oriented development, half hour outside of a hub, you can get everything that you need. That's where my mind sees this going. Because then that would mean that me sitting here in Cascade, I can walk around half an hour within Cascade. I can go see my friends. I can have lunch at a cafe. I can go to a bar. I can get my groceries. I can go to a pharmacy. I can educate my children if I have children. I can educate myself if I so choose. There's everything that I can do. I can access government services. I can access banking and financial services. I can do all of that within a half an hour radius of where I live, of the hub of where I live. And I can live there. Not just live in the sense of this is my house. I can live in half an hour.
So you don't just sleep there.
I don't just sleep there. I can live there. You understand? And that's the idea. That's the direction. That's not to say that you create these pockets or these bubbles. That's not what it's about. Because the other part of the transit-oriented development is that these are all connected. So I can go from one to another to another to another. They can be similar. They can be different. I can utilize public transportation to hop between them and get a host of different experiences. So it's not like an insular. Sorry?
Kind of like what Brooke and St. James.
Yes, very much like that. And we're set up like that from a standpoint of what's the word I'm looking for? Of, let's call it urban form. Because if you look at East-West Corridor, the East-West Corridor is just a lineup of transit-oriented developments. It's great. I would love to take it and just make it happen. It's entirely possible to make it happen. It wouldn't take much.
Okay. Got one more question. In the example you've given, how low in terms of density do you think we can scale a mixed mode community?
That is an excellent question. For transit and infrastructure, now putting on my infrastructure hat, density is about what you can afford to support. So if I can get electricity infrastructure, water infrastructure, transportation infrastructure up to a certain distance for a certain cost, then I can support the lowest density that can provide to me, if you understand me. So in other words, I'm not here to rail against, single family housing and detached housing and all these kinds of things. That's not my bag in terms of housing and public space and transportation. I'm here to say this all depends. And I know that might sound like a bit of a fluff, but it's true. This all depends. It all depends on how you value certain things, what you're willing to put into place, what you can afford to do, right? Because take for example a Santa Cruz. And I use Santa Cruz because it's one of those things that I think it's a nice little pocket of things that it could be so much more than it is. But take, for example, Santa Cruz. If I can get water, electricity, and transportation into Santa Cruz.
You left out the newest infrastructure thing.
Well, broadband, yes.
Yeah, that's an infrastructural thing now.
Yes, those are the four major infrastructural things. If I can get those four things, right? If I can have sufficient access to healthcare, that's another thing within Santa Cruz. So I have enough doctors in the vicinity. I have the right healthcare infrastructure. I have everything that I need for, say, like a level 1 trauma, let's say. Right? If I have all of that, and I can afford to put all of that in a way that does not break the bank, then I could support the density of a Santa Cruz, which is quite low density. Mm-hmm. Right? Because Santa Cruz is all these, these big houses, these big yards and and then they've got smaller pockets of things. But I can support that density once I can afford to put in the infrastructure. If I can't afford to put in the infrastructure, I need to get that infrastructure in there. I need to jack up the density because now I need to serve more people with that same infrastructure for it to be worth it. Mm-hmm. And that's the answer to these questions is never black and white. It's always, it depends. It depends on what you want to prioritize. It depends on what you're able to spend. It depends on what you're able to support from a maintenance perspective. It depends on a number of different things.
And that is actually part of the reason that even though we supposedly have coverage, internet coverage over almost the entire Trinidad, landmass of Trinidad, they can't afford to buy it, the residents, because it's so expensive.
I've often wondered what it costs to run fiber to Guayagüe. I've often wondered that.
Yeah, one of the things that happened with Guayagüe, thank God for the oil fields. Because if it weren't for Amoco in the day, that is what ran the first set of internet down Mayara and Guaya, was Amoco.
Because it was worth it to them to do it.
Yes.
$1,000 a meter for fiber, oh my goodness. I don't want to tell you what highway costs, trust me.
So there's another question. Is it solely culture that has prevented us from embracing foot traffic friendly city designs like in Europe? And is it viable to catalyze that kind of change?
No, it's not just culture. And I will argue it's never been culture because our culture used to be to do that. So it's not cultural. It is, it's comfort, it's convenience, it's a number of different things. One of the, and now I'm headed into public space. You see, transportation takes you everywhere but transportation sometimes. No, I'm headed into public space. It is not comfortable. I'll use the example of Port of Spain. It is not comfortable to walk through Port of Spain for a number of reasons. It's hot. There are very few trees. There's no way to sit. There's no way to go to the bathroom. You're harassed. The sidewalks are so narrow that you're bumping into people at every step. You are inhaling. Sorry?
The sidewalks are cracked and uneven.
Yes, there's all of that. You're inhaling diesel fumes. If you have to carry anything, forget about it. If you have more than one person with you, particularly if that person is a child, forget about it. because we have not made the public space amenable to the way that people actually have to go about their business. And because we have not done that, people either avoid the cities, or if they have to go, they drive down there, they circle around until they could find a parking spot as close to where they need to go as possible. They go where they have to go and they get out. And those are the ones who still go to town.
Mm.
The people who use town now are the people who live in town. And those people are more likely to walk because that's in their half hour.
Right.
Yeah, so it's really that we've underinvested in our public space, and where we have invested in it, we've invested in it in a way that makes it uncomfortable to use. So it's not that it's cultural; it's that people want to be comfortable, they want to feel safe, and our cities are neither.
So basically, we're talking lighting, safety, general safety, which lighting is a huge part of, ease and comfort. So you know that you're not going to break your ankle walking down the road. You're not going to trip and fall. There's no manhole cover removed. So as you walk down the street, you just fall straight braps into a hole. And it's wide enough that two people can pass without rubbing up on each other like your friends in a party.
I tell people all the time, I used to, for my sins, I used to work at PTSC. And so my job was in Citygate. And when you work at PTSC, you get free PTSC transportation. You don't have to pay for transportation. And I lived along a bus route. So no brainer, right? I don't need a car. I come in out where I'm living. I stand in a pier. I'm getting a bus. I'm going straight to my office. And then at the end of the day, I'm getting a bus and I'm coming back straight to my house. No brainer, right? If it rained, forget about it. If I missed the bus, it was an hour till the next one. If I came outside and there was a fight or an altercation or something happening, forget about it. I'm a woman alone. If I come outside and I see too many men standing on the corner, I'm not going anywhere near to pass that, right? At the end of the day, if I decide I want to do something before I go home, so I walk in town to get something and now I want to catch the bus home, I am standing at a bus stop and the bus shows up, I'm wearing a skirt and I have to lift my leg to get into the bus. Right? So I'm risking splitting my skirt just to get into the bus. Why would I do that? There's so many things that we don't think about in the way that people navigate space that we have to design into transportation. We have to design into public space in order for people to utilize it. And if we don't do those things, rather than complaining that it doesn't have that what they need is not there, people will just find an alternative.
And that alternative is what?
And that alternative is B13. That's simply it. That alternative is to spend $40,000 at a minimum on a foreign use B13, spend countless amounts of money in insurance and fuel and maintenance and all kinds of things. And that's all there is to it.
And put more load on the roads.
Yes.
Especially in Port of Spain, an old city where the roads have not been, well, they weren't designed for it, and they haven't, because they were designed way back when with walking and very few cars.
They weren't designed for it, they weren't retrofitted for it, they weren't designed for any of this. So what we're doing is we send in through as much as possible in a way that it wasn't designed to handle it. It wasn't designed to handle it at all.
So really the potholes is not Works and Transport fault? Is that design?
They're a combination of things because, again, and here we come back to what you can afford, right? I'm designing a city street, as I'm putting back on my highway engineer hat that I never really wore, but let's talk about it. I'm designing a city street. I know from my design handbooks that you design city streets at this width, with lanes this width, with this kind of structure, with this amount of asphalt, etc., because you're expecting to get these kinds of volumes and these kinds of weights. Now I am sending container trucks in high volume onto my city streets. I am sending heavy vehicles at volume through my city streets in a way that they weren't meant to handle, right? I have now created for myself a maintenance problem because when I designed the street and I did my maintenance calculations for the street, I did them based on what I know the street is supposed to be able to carry. So I have estimated a life cycle cost for the street of X, where we do life cycle estimations because that does not happen here a lot of the time. So that includes from the time I build that street to the time that I have to do major repairs or reconstruction of that street, the life cycle cost of that street. I have budgeted it out based on this thing, right? Based on these calculations that do not apply because I'm not using the street in the way that it's meant to be used. Same for our highways, same for all of that. So now I have a problem. I have a budget hole because I can't afford to maintain the street at the level it would need to be maintained to fit, to be utilized in the way that it's being utilized. So I take my maintenance budget and I said, right, I'm going to do this, and this, and everything else will just have a suck solve for now. So it's a combination of things. I know we complain a lot about maintenance in this country, but part of the problem is that we don't utilize things in addition to not being good at maintenance in general.
Okay. So we've got, like 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any final questions for Onika? Onika, you're there, you froze.
Hi, yes, I don't know what happened there.
Oh, okay, you had frozen for a while. Do you
Okay.
want to shift a little bit to your right?
Yes.
Yeah, you were kind of inching off the frame as time was going by there. So I was saying that we are almost at the time. So I was wondering if anybody had any last questions to ask. Any final? That is not the question. That's a question if we get Curly back on. They want to know if you're on forward.
No, do yourself. No,
Honestly,
what I
same difference.
and then no other question. I do want to say like one last. I want to say thank you for having me. I like talking to people about what I do. It's always fun. And I sort of like indoctrinating people into the idea that transport is about living and life. It's not about trains and buses, it's about life and living. So I like getting the chance to do that with more audiences.
I think you've managed to do that very well. I think we all know a lot more about transport and how it works and how it would work. Oh, if you had time, you would have asked about the Carnival City Plan.
Ooh. I'll stay for 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, there we go. That you can get your question.
I want to know what exactly you mean by the Carnival City Plan. Do you mean the way that Carnival is running the city, or is there something specific that I've missed?
No, I think he's talking about the Woodbrook as Carnival City plan that there was a webinar about it a couple of months ago.
Yes.
And
okay.
how basically they were going to turn Arpita Avenue into the Carnival City tourism hub. Right. Yes, the Piccadilly Circus Woodbrook.
Yes.
They did mention Piccadilly Circus.
Well,
And,
I don't know about Piccadilly Circus as an exemplar, but as you're going to know my answer because it's been my answer all along. It depends. What was shown in that seemed to be not very advanced in terms of how it had been thought through, I will say. I think that some of the ideas are good ideas. The idea of an entertainment district is a good idea, and as somebody who grew up in Woodbrook, an idea of a controllable entertainment district is a good idea as well. I think that a lot of the ways that they're talking about doing it, there's some good things in there, some bad. The idea of a pedestrian zone, well, a time controlled pedestrian zone, let's call it that, is a good one. I think that the idea of how that actually happens maybe hasn't been thought all the way through, because it looks at Arpita Avenue as this sort of an isolated thing, as opposed to something that's connected to a neighborhood. And what happens on the avenue has knock-on effects for the neighborhood. And that's not to say that's necessarily bad or good. It's just that it has to be considered. And the decisions that have to be made in the context of that.
I agree. When I looked at it, it really felt like they hadn't thought it through enough yet. There was
they kept saying that it was early stages. It's early stages. It's early stages. And
to me, the concept hadn't been firmed up. They didn't know what they wanted out of it yet.
Yes, I have to agree. They have a vague idea.
Yeah, but before you firm up what you actually do, or even, you say, this is what I wanted to do for us. The vision and the mission weren't firm yet, far less the goals and the implementation and so on. So they're talking about gates and things. And I'm like, but it's a gate for what? It's a gate to where? It's a gate from where? What is the point of this besides having a place that tourists could come?
Visioning is an art that we're losing, and it's a critical one in public space in particular. And it's one that we're losing. You have to be able to see where it is you're going before you can do anything else. You have to be able to visualize the thing in your head. You have to be able to understand where you want to go. And then you can start plotting a course to get there. But if you just say, well, we don't have the time, and thing, and God, we always planning and we never do it. Yes, I understand that. I understand that frustration. But that doesn't mean that you don't do the visioning, because if you don't do the visioning, you'll end up in a situation where what you end up with is nowhere close to what anybody envisioned.
It's that animal design by committee.
Yes, with the elephant ears and the anteater tusks, and yes, that's what it is. It becomes a Frankenstein, and it becomes a problem that you then have to solve.
Exactly.
And I love solving problems. It's my whole mission in life, but I am rather tired. So
would it not be better to design so that you wouldn't have those problems and you have other problems to solve?
when I talk about design, I come back to something that I know that y'all are very familiar with in the internet space, which is user experience.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the things that we design, a lot of the things that we envision, we don't consider the user experience. And that's in the virtual world, in the physical world, and everything. We don't consider user experience. And user experience, not just from the standpoint of me, the user, but in terms of somebody who is not me, the user.
That's actually the thing. Because of a lack of diversity in places, you design for you. That's your experience. You know how you prefer to do things. That's it. And even with teams, they're all teams that are very close, of people who are very much alike. Mm-hmm. And we all kind of do things the same way. And so that's how it works out. And that's one of the reasons that diversity is so important, because when we started getting, say, safety engineers who were not male and 6 foot, 5'11", 6'1", and 180 pounds and so forth, when they started getting 5'3" engineers, female engineers, they realized, wait, the equipment doesn't fit. The PPE doesn't fit. This doesn't fit. That doesn't fit. All these things that have been designed and used, when they expanded to other people, they realized it doesn't work. And then when if we start with a broader view of who's going to use it, then more likely it will work for everybody and not just, because if you design a sidewalk, in the American term, pavement, where there are some I've seen that are so high, they're like nearly a foot. Now, if you design a 6-inch, a 4-inch pavement or a 6-inch pavement, it will work for the 5'3" person, but it will also work for the 6'4" person.
But what it wouldn't work for is the flood, Jacqueline. I will leave it there.
Thank you very much.
I will leave it there, but I will say diversity, yes. Empathy, always.
Yeah. So, what, design for empathy? That's what we're going to call it now?
No, people talk about diversity and inclusion, but diversity, inclusion, and empathy, those are the three things.
Mm-hmm. And that is...
That if you're not designing, if you're designing and you don't have a diverse room of people, and that means diversity in all kinds of ways, if you do not include the people for whom you are designing, and if you don't have empathy for those people that you have included, what you doing?
That is so true. Well, thank you so much. You ended on a really good note. Thank you very much, Onika, for coming and sharing these very interesting thoughts with us. Kevon, we have anything else to bring up before we close?
Not necessarily, not within the comments. I mean, there were a couple of just reaffirming comments from Richard about the Moko situation with Maya and Guayaro. Ooh, that's a sign of the tiredness. And yes, more or less, I think everyone really got in their minds the whole idea of transport being really linked to how we live, or you know, that sort of shift that needs to happen as opposed to something that is a distinct thing to everything else that we do. So on my behalf, I've learned a lot during this chat, and I'd like to thank you tremendously. It would be my desire for this sort of information to just reverberate throughout all of TNT, and we could really probably sink some teeth into some of the decisions that are made that ultimately affect us and our whole lifestyle and our whole well-being. So I would say that I would like to thank you personally for this talk. I know that with Internet Society Trinidad and Tobago, we'll look at many different avenues to continue reposting and republishing this. And just again, thanks again for being here with us this evening.
Thank you for having me, and I love the bed. It's rad.
Yes. I'm glad for the conversations with Series because it's the most prominent space where I can display the maid. I love Jackie's tresses, and I always call her Jackie's tresses, and in my case, it's the virtual bed. Well, it's real, but it looks funny.
It's the pandemic. The pandemic
bed, exactly.
Except it's one of those things, like as you were saying in the pandemic, people think that we're going back to the old normal, and they don't. You know, it don't exist.
Whatever the bed was before, don't go back to that. This is magnificent.
Before was a hodgepodge of ingrown hairs and very nasty skin. So I think the beard is here to stay for a while.
Our next item in our next session in the Conversations with series is next week, Thursday, the 8th at 7 o'clock as per usual. And that is going to be Master Onika Morris-Alleyne, who is the Court Executive Administrator of the Judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago. It's kind of the judgy people way of saying CEO from my research. And she's the one who's basically been pushing for this e-judiciary. I don't know if people saw that it came out today that the mask fines, the people who get fined for wearing your mask, for not wearing your mask, can now pay online at the judiciary. It was came out in the news as of today. You can pay your mask fines online at court pay. So she's the driving force behind all of that. So she'll be with us next week to talk about the e-judiciary. And my concern with that is to make sure that we don't leave people behind, because the digital divide is not going anywhere.
Correct.
It might shrink, but with digital transformation, it's still not going. Hopefully it will shrink, but it's not going to. We're not going to have everybody online perfect all the time, because there are people who cannot go online for many reasons. And justice has to be available to everyone. So how do we manage that sort of thing? Because what are the benefits of going online for justice? But then what are the threats, what are the issues that we might have by leaving people behind, and how the judiciary plans to manage all of that?
And Jackie, on that very point, I think that's a recurrent theme we've been seeing. So we have digital transformation and a lot of pivot strategies because of the pandemic. But the real question is, how focused are we on those digital divide initiatives? Are they meeting the requirements? Are they integrated with what we're doing to navigate the pandemic? I think that's a really interesting conversation we'll have with session.
Just gave me an idea, because one of the places that actually has shown up is in the vaccination.
Yes.
So we can see if we can find somebody from the Ministry of Health to come and talk about that in another one of our Conversations with series. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much, Onika, for giving us your time today. Thank you, Kevon, and thank you to the team at ISOC TT, Niran Bihari, our chairman. I, Jacqueline Morris, am the vice chair. Our secretary, Richard Padilla, and our financier, our treasurer, the woman who keeps us solvent, Lisa Ramnath. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week, Thursday. So bye.